houses, brothers and sisters, mothers and children, and fields of persecutions, and in the age to come eternal life. But many who are first will be last, and the last will be first.
Okay, I'm going to give you some very important information, and I expect you to pay attention. In case you don't know it, St. Anthony of Padua was a Franciscan monk who lived from 1195 to 1231. This St. Anthony is known as the patron saint of all lost things. Everything from misplaced keys or eyeglasses to missing spouses can be found if you pray to St. Anthony. I have a dear friend named Lana who taught me all about St. Anthony and his ability to find whatever anyone has lost. And she likes to point out that St. Anthony has helped her find all sorts of lost things, lost cell phones, keys, glasses, toothbrushes, and all kinds of stuff. Lana repeats this little prayer to St. Anthony whenever she can't find anything. And here is the prayer. This is the part you need to pay attention to. Well, you need to pay attention to all of it, but this is. Tony, Tony, don't delay. Help me find my whatever today. So now I'd like you to learn this prayer, and maybe all of those misplaced things will suddenly show up right in front of you. So try it. Tony, Tony, don't delay. Help me find mine
Today.
today. You got it. Now I'm telling you all of this for two reasons. In the first place, our friend Joe is trying with all of his strength and heart to find God. And God is nowhere to be found. Perhaps if Job knew about good old Tony, Job would have had some success in finding Job if he had offered that prayer. Who knows? The other reason I'm sharing Tony with you has to do with friendship. You see, Lana and I have become very close friends over the years, and we rely on our friendship. Lana and I have traveled many times to Ukraine together, and we've been on a few other trips as well. We share our joys and frustrations, our worries, and our complaints. Our friendship allows us to say just exactly whatever is on our mind. And we don't always agree, but we do trust each other and depend on one another frequently. Indeed, I'm sure you all have friends like Lana whom you can rely upon to share a funny story with or whenever you need a shoulder to cry on. I'm quite sure we wouldn't be able to function without friendship in our lives. Now then, Joe had friends. Several of them, as a matter of fact, and when word got around that things weren't going well for Joe, these friends stopped what they were doing and rushed to Joe's side. And they were downright shocked with what they found. Yes, they had heard things were going badly for Joe, but what faced these friends was much worse than they could have possibly imagined. As we heard last week, Job lost everything. Every last dime was gone. On top of that, all of his children and their families and servants had all been killed as well. And just when Job thought his life couldn't get any worse, it did. Job was now covered with huge, oozing sores all over his body. Red welts were spread from the top of Job's head to the end of his toes. He was itching up a storm, scratching the sores with a piece of broken wood. And that's how his friends found Job that day, sitting on the garbage pile, picking away at his in silence. They all sat together there on that smelly heap of trash for 7 days and 7 nights. Not one word was spoken. They just sat with Job, keeping him company, letting Job know that he wasn't alone. Now, sitting in silence was the best thing these friends could do for Job, because when they finally decided to open their mouths and speak up, they managed to stir up all kinds of trouble for Job, and that was the last thing he needed. You see, the friends decided one by one to lash out at Job, to point out all of his faults and shortcomings, declaring that he must have done something to deserve this punishment, because in their view, all of this grief, sickness, and loss was Job's fault. Job must have messed up somewhere along the line, because otherwise God wouldn't have done all of that nasty stuff to Job. Think about it, Job, they said. If you do good, God will reward you. And if you do bad things, then bad things will happen. That's just how it works. Confess, Job. Open up to whatever terrible things you did. Then maybe God will decide to listen. The tirades went on and on. The friends let Job have it for a number of chapters in the story. Eventually, Job has had enough and boldly declares that he knows he hasn't done anything to make God angry. All Job wants is to find God. I know God must be around here someplace. All I have to do is find God and demand that God show up so I can ask God some questions. Tony, don't delay. Help me find God today. That's not too much to ask. After all I've been through, says Job. Come on, God, show up. Come on over here, talk to me. At this point, God seems to be nowhere. And for those of us who have been tormented with pain and loss or filled with the anguish of grief or sadness, it can seem to us as though we too have been abandoned by God. At this point, all Job wants is his day in court. If God is supposed to be the judge, then Job thinks he should be able to tell his side of the story to God. After all, it's only fair, isn't it? Job thinks he's entitled to answers from God. He believes that God owes him an explanation. Does any of that sound familiar? When we're confronted with devastating illness, the unexpected death of a loved one, or even just listening to the news every day, we may find ourselves wondering just what has happened to God. Maybe we should pray, Tony, don't delay, help us find God today. Sometimes the unanswered questions and despair may cause us to give up hope. Yet our friend Job doesn't quit. In spite of his pain and agony and lamenting, Job never gave up hope of seeing God. Somehow Job hangs on despite all of his losses. Even though all of his friends' criticism and complaints go on and on, Job hangs in there. Now, it might seem as though God has left Job to fend for himself, but Job hasn't left God. Indeed, I think Job knows beyond a shadow of any doubt that just because God is silent doesn't mean God is absent. I think we can thank goodness for Job because he teaches us that faith isn't based on easy answers or solutions. It's all right to argue with God. It's okay to complain and shake our fists at God from time to time when we're at our wits' end. Faith in God isn't a blind faith. Faith in God includes unanswered questions and doubts. As one author writes, arguing with God is an act acceptance, whatever happens, as God will, or a simple theological rationalization for why things are. But that's not quite the story in our gospel lesson today. As you heard, once upon a time there was a fellow who stepped right up to Jesus, recognizing him as a teacher and an authority about God. Now this guy knew all of the commandments. He followed the Jewish laws and traditions. He obeyed the rules. He behaved himself, and yet he realized that he still lacked something. He just wasn't sure God was around. He needed to know how to find God. What do I have to do, Jesus, to have God's love surround me all my days on earth and forever? What am I missing here, Jesus? Perhaps the Tony prayer could work for this man as well. At any rate, our friend was looking for God and some easy answers. As the theologian William Willimon points out, many of us are just like this man. Willimon calls it a bumper sticker faith. The 3 spiritual laws, 6 basic fundamentals, and 4 Christian principles to live by. I think that's exactly what this guy had in mind. Easy answers, simple solutions, and I'll go to find God. But once again, Jesus turns it all upside down. Jesus, who we are told was filled with love for this man, tells him very simply and plainly, give it all up. Give away everything you own, all your wealth, all your stuff, and give to those who don't have anything. And then you'll see what you really do have, including God's love, presence, and grace. Well, I don't know about you, but I really can't blame this guy for running away as fast as his designer shoes could carry him. It's safe to say that none of us give away everything we have. We have to keep something for ourselves. It just isn't fair for Jesus to declare that God expects us to give it all up. There's no doubt about it. This isn't a story that many of us want to hear. We really can't bring ourselves to believe that Jesus expects anyone, especially us, to give everything we have to some poor slob we don't even know. Maybe you've heard of the man Garrison Keillor, who told all sorts of stories about his favorite fictional town, Lake Wobegon. This story from Keillor is about a Sunday morning in Lake Wobegon Lutheran Church. The sermon had been droning on for too long, and Clarence Bunsen had checked out early. He realizes it's almost time for the offering, so he quietly reaches for his wallet. Upon opening his wallet, Clarence discovers that he has no cash. He takes out his pen and hides his checkbook in the middle of his Bible, right next to one of the Psalms. He begins to scratch out a check for $30 because he almost had a heart attack that week, and because somebody in the church will count the offering and he wants them to see that he gave $30. Well, he tries not to be obvious, but a lady to his right sees him. Clarence can tell she's thinking he's writing in the Pew Bible, so he doesn't look at what he's doing. She gives him a funny stare and turns back to the sermon. Clarence tries to quietly rip the check from the checkbook with limited success, still not looking at what he's doing, so that the lady in the pew next to him won't know he has written out a check in church. The offering plate comes by, and Clarence proudly puts in his check, only to realize a moment too late that he has just written a check for $300, not $30 as he had intended. He accidentally wrote 300 on 2 different lines when he wasn't looking. What could he do? On the one hand, he couldn't go downstairs after church and find the deacons counting the collection and say, fellows, there's been a mistake. I gave more than I really wanted to. On the other hand, he gave all that he had in his checking account and a little bit more. Perhaps he and his family will have to eat beans and oatmeal for the rest of the month. Clarence thought. But even though the contribution was going to a good place, Clarence still wasn't convinced. But there was one thing. In that moment, Clarence felt fully alive for the first time in a long time. Even though it was inadvertent, for the first time, Clarence could remember he had put God first. Maybe that's what Jesus was trying to tell this rich man in our story today. Jesus spoke to this man with love and compassion, trying to help him understand that if he really wants to find God, then God must come first. Abundant living has nothing to do with things and stuff that take up space and will eventually someday be forgotten. Abundant living is found in the way we give back to God all of that has been given to us. And Jesus reminded his disciples who had given it all up to follow Jesus that even in the midst of persecution and pain, the most dreadful and darkest moments of our lives, and in spite of our doubts and questions, and even when we desire to put ourselves first, through it all, God is with us. After all, Jesus proclaims, all things are possible with God. Thanks be to God. Amen.